Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, with Tyr right around the corner in Master Duel, I wanted to give you more of an in-depth and kind of analysis on the cards, and more specifically, what they do and how to counter them for Master Duel. Because I know so many people are wanting to counter them, but the best way to know how to stop something from working, or more specifically, learning how to stop a deck, oftentimes requires you to know how to actually play the deck. So I'm going to explain the overall strategies behind the deck, how to play the deck, how to functionally do what you're trying to do, and then explain deck building choices and the like, and then I will explain how to counter it. Because at that point, we'll have a basic understanding of how Tyr works. So, this is not a perfect guide, because I don't think I could possibly do that. But this should hopefully give you a basic understanding of what to look out for, what to do in order to counter, or more specifically, just interact with Tyr. And I'm not gonna lie, if we get it at this point, where Tyr is completely unlimited, and we have the Ishizu cards at their current limitations, which I highly doubt, then yeah, Ishizu Tyr will be Tier 0. Maybe not so much on the ladder. I think that it won't be as competitive, but for the top tier players and for the people who are actually good at the game, they will be playing this and they will be doing a lot better, right? So the better you are as a pilot, the better this deck becomes. But also, this deck is just crazy. You can still win with things like Splight or Branded or what have you, since a lot of those aren't limited. So don't be afraid of trying to play something else, but know that, one, this deck is really fun. It's just a fun deck, it's a cool deck, it does a lot of really cool and interesting things. So there's that. And two, this deck will be everywhere, if not limited in some regard, but even then it will still be everywhere. So, I am just going to talk about all of the cards that are currently available in the TCG for Tyr, and we're just going to kind of go over all of them. I highly doubt that we will get specifically Tyr Kashtira, Scream, no, we already have Meta Noise. What is it? Heartbeat, I think. Heartbeat was released after the fact. And then we probably also won't get... It wasn't Grief. Rukalos. That was the other one. So those four are the ones that I'm not expecting to arrive in the first wave of support, similar to how it was with Power of the Elements, and similar to how Sprite was released. So, yeah, Sprite didn't receive their Sprint, and I wouldn't be surprised if Tyr didn't receive some of their cards. So let's start off by just simply reading the cards and explaining what they do. So we have Rhinoheart as the first Tyr monster, first main deck monster, and the only one that is a water warrior. All the rest are dark aquas, and they are all the mermaids. So starting off with Rhinoheart, if this card is a normal special summon, send a Tyr to your from your deck to your grave. Also, if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon this card, and if you do, send a Tyr from your hand to the graveyard. Now, obviously, if you need, if you when you summon it, you have to be able to send a Tyr. So there's that, and it does send for effect, triggering the Tyr cards. Now, all of the Tyr cards have an effect when sent to the graveyard to fusion summon, except for this guy who special summons himself. So, there you go. Moving on, we have Merly. If this card is normal or special, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And then if sent, you fusion summon by putting the cards onto the bottom of the deck in any order. So, you put them back, and then you get a fusion summon, utilizing any fusion. You just fusion summon a fusion monster from your extra deck. That's it. Any fusion monster. This is the main benefit behind the Tyrs. The fact that they can go into anything, such as, for example, a Mud Dragon or Dragostapelia. Dragostapelia is an insane card, and something that I would not be surprised seeing in multiples in a lot of decks, because this card is very strong. It has a soft once per turn. You could summon 2 of it, and seeing as how it needs a fusion monster, that's not necessarily too difficult, and then it's just another dark monster as well. So, pretty nice there. Next up, we have ourselves Havnis. Havnis, I think a lot of people know this one. When your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand, quick effect, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And then it has the same fusion summoning clause, right? So this one is what makes you be able to play the game on the opponent's turn. As soon as they activate anything, you get to play the game as well. You mill some cards, you'll probably hit a tier monster, which allows you to fusion summon, and then you can basically play the game from there, which is really cool. I actually really like this idea, and it's very awesome, but it is a bit overpowered. Let's be honest. Next up, we have Shirin. Shirin, during your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send a monster from your hand to the grave. Then send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So another way to mill cards. They all have a way to mill 3 cards, and then Shirin also just gets a free body onto your field, which is very nice. And since it sends a card for effect, you are also able to send something like a Havness, a Merly, or a Rhino Heart in order to get another monster into the graveyard, which is just solid, right? If you send something like a Rhino Heart could then special summon himself, sending another tier monster to the graveyard, and then you have 2 level 4s, which could then go into an Xyz play, which is very, very nice. Next up, we have Tearlaments Kashtira, which is the newest of the cards, and I very highly doubt this card will be released, seeing as how it's Kashtira and not as much tier, but it is still a tier card. During the main phase, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, banish a tier or Kashtira or tier card from your hand or graveyard. If this card is normal special summon, you can send the top 3 cards of either player's deck to the graveyard. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can send the top 2 cards of your deck to the grave. So basically what this card does is it allows you to similarly play on the opponent's turn, but more specifically, it does require you to also have another card in your hand or grave to banish. But then, of course, when it's summoned, it does the Havness effect. But you could also send the opponent's cards to the graveyard if you so chose as well, which comes up occasionally in Kashtira. But more specifically, it also has the ability to send additional cards when it is sent to the graveyard. So if you hit something, or if you mill this off of one of your tier cards, you get to mill more to then potentially hit more tier cards. So that's it for the monsters. For the spells, we have Perlino. This card is the field spell that does basically all the things that you need an archetypal field spell to do. So we have, when it's activated, you can add a tier monster or a Visa Starfrost from your deck to your hand. Then fusion monsters and tier monsters gain 500 attack, and if a tier monster you control or in your graveyard is shuffled into the deck or extra deck, you can target a card in the field and destroy it. So this is very cool because guess what? You can trigger it with the shufflers. You shuffle back one of your tier monsters or a fusion monster, and you pop a card on the field thanks to this guy. This is what makes tier so incredibly, consistent. Being able to just search out a tier name consistently is pretty good, but 2, being able to then use it as disruption as well is pretty good. It's kind of quick effect disruption, but not quite. Next up, we have Scream. This is another card that I don't expect it to obtain at the very release of the game, or the release of tier into the game, but this card is very crazy. If a monster is normal or special summoned and you control a tier monster, you can send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. Also, for the rest of this turn, all monsters your opponent controls lose 500. That's it. That's permanent. Any monster summoned that your opponent controls loses 500 attack. Crazy. Also, you get a mill 3 whenever a card is summoned. It's really, really strong. Also, if this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can add a tier trap from your deck to your hand. A lot of the spell traps have a way to recur resources. So, yeah, this one adds a trap. Pretty nice. Next up, we have Heartbeat. It is the spell trap disruption. Target a spell trap on the field, or you could target 2 if you control Visa Starfrost. Shuffle them into the deck, then send a card from your hand to the graveyard. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can target a tier trap in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Again, just being able to recur resources. Very nice. Next up, we have Grief. Grief is arguably very good. I think most people at the end of Tier's lifespan just started to cut this card, or just didn't really play it except for early on. And the reason for that is just because it's not really worth it to mill it, and it's not necessarily that impactful to actually draw it. So people just kind of cut it. It just wasn't worth it. You're already insanely consistent, and this is just a consistency card. Special summon a tier card from your deck or graveyard, then send a monster you control to the graveyard with the same type or attribute as the special summoned monster. If this card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you could target a banished tier trap, add it to your hand. As you can see, it kind of helps. You can, send something and then send a card from your field to the graveyard in order to then fusion summon, which is pretty nice. But all in all, it's not all too useful. It's nice, but not too impactful. So again, most people cut it. Soliak, on the other hand, is an absolutely insane card, and actually one of the reasons why tier was even as remotely good as it was. If you control a tier card, a tier monster, or Visa Star Frost, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls, negate its effects, then send a monster you control to the graveyard. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add a tier monster from your deck to your hand. So, two very impactful effects. It's a monster effect negation, and it's a permanent monster effect negation, which is very cool. Similar to Boral End, except you can respond to it. And, on top of that, it sends a monster you control to the graveyard, meaning you can trigger a tier monster to then fusion summon, which is pretty cool. On top of that, you could also send something like a Rukalos or a Kaleido Heart, which then just brings itself back, which is, also pretty cool. And then on top of that, it has the effect where it's sent to if it is sent to the graveyard, you just get to add a monster. Awesome. So now those millers can also be searches, which can also then be additional monsters, which can then be, you get the idea, right? Everything kind of gets everything, which is why it's so incredibly consistent. And honestly, consistency is king when it comes to mostly larger tournaments. I think in Master Duel, where it is a best of one, it won't matter as much how consistent it is, but the power level of the deck is still insane. So even with that being said, it being consistent doesn't matter as much. Moving on, we have Crime. Crime is just a standard spell trap, or counter trap Omni Negate, similar to Roar or whatever other counter trap you would think of. When a spell trap card or monster effect is activated while you control a tier monster, negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle it into the deck. That is very nice. And then you can send a monster from your hand to the graveyard. It doesn't have to be even a tier monster, but it could be because it activates the effect. You could target one of your banished tier monsters, add it to your hand if it is milled. Pretty nice. The Crime was also being cut most of the time, mostly just due to the fact that it wasn't really ever worth it. Being able to send a card, being able to Omni Negate, that's all good and dandy, but the thing is, like, having one Omni Negate counter trap often wasn't worth it in a tier mirror match. I think against other decks, this card in particular is significantly better, but I would say play it in Master Duel, definitely worth it, but if you're seeing a lot of Ishizu tier, it's not going to be very useful. Next up, we have Meta Noise. If you control a tier monster or a Visa Starfrost, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, flip it face down. Then send a tier monster from your deck to the grave. So this is notable because it actually sends from deck instead of sending from your field. So you can actually utilize resources that aren't already on your field. So that means you don't have to send something like a Kaleido Heart or a Rukalos to the graveyard if they've already utilized their effect. And then it's just Book of Moon, which is fine, I guess. Then, however, it does have a send effect, when it's sent to the graveyard, it has the effect to target a tier monster in the graveyard and add it to the hand. Now, this has been seeing a lot more meta relevance as of right now. A lot of tier players are currently playing this card because of all of the limitations currently on tier, right? Most of the stuff is currently limited to 1, so that's why most people are playing this now. Being able to add back a monster is just very, very nice, right? If it, something gets stopped or, gets negated or what have you, now you can add it back, right? And then it also allows you to, like, shuffle back your Rukalos if that ends up getting sent to the graveyard or what have you. But also just, like, flipping a card face down right now in the meta is very strong. So that's another reason. Not great. Honestly, if we have all of this, we're not playing this card. This card isn't very good. Even in a 60-card list, it's not very good. Moving on, we have, obviously, the Ishizu stuff. You should know how these work. I'm not going to overly explain these, but they worked so synergistically well with the tier stuff because milling cards with Kelbeck and Agito, but more specifically, it's the shufflers that are actually the main benefit. It sounds weird, but in a tier 0 meta, having the ability to potentially interact with the opponent's cards is way more impactful, right? Being able to just shuffle them away is insanely good. Being able to prevent them from utilizing their fusion summon effects is really powerful. And the fact that you can also utilize these with things like the Herald Vorn's Light, which is now also, I believe, limited to 1, was one of the reasons why it was so insane. You could negate something, get a Mudora into your graveyard, and now if your opponent's tier cards wants to activate, they now have to chew through a Mudora on top of that, which is insane. And then to top it all off, the Paralino exists. So yeah, the shufflers are way more impactful than even the millers. I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you get to mill a whole bunch of cards, and now it's crazy. But in all honesty, that matters significantly less compared to actually being able to interact with the graveyard. So there's that. We also have, I saw a lot of people also playing Diviner of Herald throughout the lifespan. It's kind of a tech choice. You can either play it or not. You oftentimes cut, like, maybe some tier cards here or there, or more specifically, the Ishizu stuff would be cut in order to play this. But the main benefit of playing Diviner is most of the time you don't need your normal in tier. That's just not necessary too much. But Diviner, what it does is it allows you for normal to send something like a Kelbeck, or more specifically one of the shufflers, right, in order to then have a level 6 on your field. You get to a level 4, which is not that hard. Rhino Heart, as well as Sheeran, as well as all of the shuffler, or all of the Ishizu cards are all level 4s, and then you can make Baron. That is the main benefit of this. Being able to end on a negate is also just hugely beneficial. Now, you could also play the Shadal stuff in order to go into like a Winda. Obviously, I don't have that here, but that is definitely something that you should look out for, right? Winda being able to prevent you from special summoning more than once is very impactful, but I think it mostly fell out of prevalence mostly due to the fact that it, like in a single special summon, that being Kit Kalos, you can now walk over the monster, right? So it wasn't anything too impactful, again, in the mirror match, and even against other decks, it wasn't all that great, just due to the fact that it was rather inconsistent, and it took up an extra deck slot that you really wanted for other more impactful cards, like, for example, Sprind to send a Merly, or Curious, which is now currently banned, but like Curious as well, or Ausa in order to grab it, like a Maxi to potentially go into an Elf to get back the Merly, etc., right? So the Shadal stuff is definitely things that you should be worried about, or like thinking about, and I definitely think that 60 card tier X something or other, or like Ishizu tier plus other such things that want to fusion summon like Branded or Shadal is going to be very prevalent. But alas, I'm more so talking about the tier stuff. And Diviner is one of those cards that just is synergistic with the tier stuff as well, mostly due to the Ishizu cards. So yeah, very nice. On top of that, it's a level 2, which means you can bring it back with the Splight Elf in order to then mill another card, like for example, another Kelbeck or another Agido, or, you know, a Shuffler if you don't already have those, in order to, again, add additional disruption, or add another play starter to, again, start playing on your opponent's turn. So, very good card. Definitely wouldn't be surprised to be seeing that one. Then, of course, we have the Herald of Orange Terraforming instant fusion on, or in particular, is absolutely insane. Instant fusion just is kind of an auto win in a lot of games, due to Kit Kalos. Kit Kalos is the main, like, main combo piece, right? It's where like everything kind of goes through. You kind of go through Kit Kalos, and that's why it's banned currently in the TCG and in the OCG. Yeah, this card is absolutely crazy. It just requires a tier monster and an aqua monster, which is not too difficult, seeing as how all of these are aquas. But you could also play something like Danger Nessie, which also happens to be an aqua. But you're not really hurting for aquas, so that's not that big of a deal. If you activate one of these, as long as you have another tier name, you're off to the races. So not that difficult. But if this card is special summoned, you can add a tier monster to your hand, or you could just send it to the graveyard. Either or, any tier card. So you could add something like a Sulliak, or you could even add Merly. And Merly comes up for the second effect. Now Merly, notably on summon, just sends 3. Fantastic. That is great. You want that because you want to mill cards. So Kit Kalos has the ability to also target a card you control, special summon a tier from the hand or graveyard, and if you do, send the targeted monster to the graveyard. Now, notably, it sends, it doesn't destroy, so you could send your own monster to the graveyard, such as targeting your own Kit Kalos in order to send it to the graveyard. Why do we do this? Well, Kit Kalos, if sent to the graveyard by card effect, can send the top 5 cards of your deck to the grave. This means that if you search out the Merly, you can then go Kit Kalos, send itself to the graveyard, special summoning the Merly, Chainlink 1, or Kit Kalos Chainlink 1, Merly Chainlink 2, to mill a total of 8 cards. This is absolutely insane, because then those 8 cards could be utilized in order to go into additional fusion summons. This also gets Kit into the graveyard to then be shuffled back to go into something like a Kaleido Heart, because it is an Aqua, you know? Or more specifically, the Rukalos. Rukalos specifically requires a Kit Kalos, so it would make sense to put that into the grave so that you could shuffle it back for the Rukalos. Really good. Also, it's just a fusion monster, so you could go into Dragostapelia, or, you know, if you need to, you could also go into Mudragon. All of that, pretty good. Right? So, there's that. Yeah. Instant Fusion also gets it because, of course, it does. And what's funny is you can go Instant Fusion, they can go Max C, and then you can go End Phase, and then just mill some cards. And you can kind of end your turn there oftentimes. You go Kit Kalos, add a card, add like Havness, and then you just kind of stare at your opponent and go, all right. Yeah, there's lots of ways to play around Max C in this deck. Again, just one special summon, that being Kit Kalos, allows you to get Havness, which then allows you to play on the opponent's turn. Or you could get a myriad of other things as well. Potentially even something like Scream. Moving on, we have ourselves things like Super Poly. That is going to be pretty impactful, especially now that it's at 3. However, even with that being said, I don't think Super Poly is going to be all that good in or against Ishizu. The reason for this is due to, or more specifically, the tier stuff. The reason for this is because it does utilize the opponent's monsters, which then just float and trigger their effects, which isn't exactly something you are going to want to do. And it's not like you have a really good Super Poly target that is going to prevent this, right? It's not like you're going to go into Rukalos. They're not going to leave a Kit Kalos on their field, right? So it's not like that's a viable option, right? You theoretically could go Kaleido Heart, but even that's not really a good idea. You, again, theoretically could make Kit, but again, that's not likely to happen. Like, all of these are kind of unlikely situations, right? Just mostly due to the requirements that that we have in Master Duel, or in this deck for the fusion summons. However, what I wanted to say is Garuda is a absolutely insane card. Let me pull it up. Garura. It's a TCG exclusive card that just requires 2 monsters with the same type and attribute, but different names. That's it. Now, this is significantly more easy to summon with a super polymerization. I doubt that we are going to get this in Master Duel, which is why I don't think that the super poly is going to be as useful, right? In the OCG, they didn't have this. Super poly basically never played. And the reason for that, you're basically only making a Dragostapelia that's going to be more or less useless. It's not going to do a whole lot. It can, stop like a Kaleido Heart or a Rukalos, but that's not really the biggest problem, right? Because a lot of the effects are specifically like in the grave that you're really going to want to deal with. So being able to make a Dragostapelia is nice, but the monsters are just coming back and they have higher attack stats anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal, right? So again, Garuda, a little bit better, but we don't have it. So, however, if you want a good hand trap, Infip is that hand trap. Infip specifically stopping the Kit Kalos from sending itself to the graveyard and from special summoning, as well as from searching, as well as basically doing anything, is fantastic. That means that the only thing that's really going to happen is they could potentially mill if it was summoned off of something like an instant fusion, or if it gets sent to the graveyard via another mean, right? Infip is just a godsend. It's super good, and it stops the main combo piece. However, even with that being said, it's just going to slow them down, not necessarily stop them. So do keep that in mind. Triple Tactics Talents, however, is going to be very good as well. Guess what? Havness specifically needs to more or less activate in the main phase, unless you activate something in the standby phase, or something along those lines. Like, I don't know, you go Branded Opening and then summon, and then don't activate in the main phase. But, I mean, for the most part, in the main phase, Triple Tactics Talents, you're going to be able to deal with the Havness, or rip a card out their hand, or take control of a monster that they inevitably ended up summoning off of that Havness activation, right? Oh, they went into a Kaleido Heart off of that Havness? Great, now it's mine. This card is very good. Just so very nice. Yeah, and then also being able to steal that monster then allows you to fusion summon it off yourself. Grass. This card isn't actually all that good. It's good in theory, but the problem is that you're playing a 60 card deck with grass most of the time, which means that you're just being more inconsistent. The thing is, the tiers are very consistent at 40, right? And on top of that, they're not really trying to mill as many cards. It's more so hitting like the specific cards. So when you fill your deck with a whole bunch of nonsense and you end up not seeing grass, it just makes your deck less consistent and less powerful, right? Grass is, in theory, nice, but in practice, it's not really all that worth it. It still works, but most of the time when we were seeing it at, or in the OCG, most players weren't playing this. And the reason is just like, it's not as good as just playing a 40 card consistent version of the deck. It's still good, and I'm almost guaranteed, you're almost guaranteed to see it in Master Duel, specifically paired with other things, like more Shaddolls or Branded or something along those lines. But if it's just Ishizu tier, it's not worth it. And Ishizu tier is going to be the better version. Snow is just in here for that as well. And then, of course, we have the Power 9, as I like to call them, which are just Maxi, Ash, Called By, and Cross Out. Pretty standard. Now, let's talk about the extra deck. So we have, obviously, Kit Kalos. We've already talked about that one. Kaleido Heart is one of the cards that I do expect it to actually obtain in this first set, and this just requires Rhino Heart and 2 Aquas. Now, it cannot be used as fusion material, so do keep that in mind, but if this card is special summoned, or if an Aqua monster is sent to the graveyard, or to your graveyard by card effect while this card is on the field, you can target a card your opponent controls and shuffle it away. It's just Unicorn. It's crazy. Really, really good, just in general. Think of it similarly to, like, Tri-Brigade Shureg, where Shureg is able to banish a card. This card shuffles. However, it does, I believe, target. So, there you go. If this card is sent from the graveyard, or sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can just special summon it, and then send a tier from your deck to the graveyard. Yeah, dealing with this card is not easy. You kind of have to banish it or shuffle it away or something like that. Because if you send it to the graveyard, it's just going to end up fusion summoning another monster, or just, I mean, it brings itself back and then also sends a tier, which is not exactly great. And since it also sends a tier card and not a tier monster, you could potentially send something like a SnowiKs, like the second SnowiKs that you have, or a Crime, or a Heartbeat to get something else back, right? Next up, we have Rukolos. Again, something I'm not expecting to obtain or to show up in the first set of tier cards, but this requires Kit Kalos and a tier monster. Other Aqua monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. Now, this one notably can be, so do keep that in mind. You can only use the following effect of Rukolos once per turn. When your opponent activates a card effect that includes the effect to special summon a monster, you can negate the activation and destroy it. Then send a tier card from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard. And then if this fusion summon card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can special summon this card. So notably, you can send itself to the graveyard in order to negate something and then bring it back. Now, notably, this also says fusion summoned card. So once it comes back, it is no longer a fusion summoned card, similar to Masquerade. So yeah, that's cool. That's all. But you could still, potentially negate 2 things. Because I don't believe it is a hard once per turn. No. Yeah, it is a hard once per turn on the negate. Everything else isn't a hard once per turn. So that's pretty cool. And then, of course, Dragostapelia and Mud Dragon are just solid cards. Mud Dragon can specifically be made with, I believe it's 2 monsters of the same attribute but different. I believe it's just like, if you get another dark into your graveyard, which isn't all that difficult, with like the Bestials, you are able to go into this guy, and then with this, you're able to go and fuse off into, sorry, not fuse. You're able to then use him for an Xyz summon. There you go. As for Xyz monsters, Abyss Dweller is absolutely crazy. Baguska is also really good, putting everything to defense position, also preventing things like the Kit Kalos. It's just kind of plan B, This is also another option against a Maxi, You go like normal summon Rhino Heart, and then Millicard, and then they go, what you might have it, Maxi, and you go, well, shoot, okay. You go for your fusion summon, and then you just keep this guy on field if you can. And then you go for like a Mudora or a Keldo or something along those lines, right? Then you can go Baguska. That was a terrible example, but I think you get the idea. And then Time Thief Redoer. Notably, Time Thief Redoer allows you to detach a card for effect, similar to how Splight or Gigantic Splight works. Time Thief Redoer works the same way. So it's going to resolve detaching the card, allowing you to then fusion summon, because this card was sent to, or the cards were sent to the graveyard via card effect. So again, you can send something like a Sheeran to the graveyard in order to trigger its effect to then fusion summon, or you could send something like a Rhino Heart, which can then special summon itself back to the field and then send another card to then get that fusion summon. So yeah, Time Thief Redoer is a very good card. Then of course Zeus. As for the Link monsters, I mentioned Splight Elf earlier. Yes, Marley is a 2, so you can use that. You could also potentially play something like Dark or Ausa in order to go into the Elf via having a Link 2 monster. You could also do this with Sprind as well. So instead of going for Elf in order to bring back a Marley, you could instead go for Sprind to send it to the graveyard. Fantastic, I know. This is why the Splight Elf is banned. Well, that, and it's just a generically insane card. And then, of course, we have Curious. 3 monsters with the same attribute, but different types. This card in particular, I don't think we'll see as much play since we already have the Ishizu stuff, but it is something to keep in mind. The reason that this won't see as much play is because it was specifically good with the Danger tier stuff. Now, it's also just an insanely good card. Being able to send basically any card to the graveyard is pretty impactful, but all in all, I don't see this card being banned in Master Duel, nor do I see it being very impactful, since I don't see the Danger stuff coming up, and I don't really see another way to realistically summon this. So that's it for most of the extra deck. You could also play things like the Underworld Goddess, or IP Masquerena, or Avermax, or more Xyz, or you could play the second Dragastapelia, or there are a myriad of things that you could play in the extra deck. That's one thing that also makes Tier very interesting, is the flexibility, right? Most of the stuff that is in here are flexible slots, right? You don't need to play Baguska, you don't need to play Curious, you don't need to play Zeus, you don't need to play Elf, or sorry, not Elf, Baron. You don't even need to play like double Kit Colors. There are a lot of other cards. You don't even need to play Elf, Sprind, nor Dark, right? And Redoer is also something that you don't need to play. And honestly, Abyss Dweller, if Tier isn't the best deck, is also something you don't need to play. So, again, looking at this, you basically have 10 slots in your extra deck that you could fill with more or less anything depending on the situation. But that's like cutting it close. It's more of like, you have like 5 slots that, and even more so, like 3 slots that could be literally anything, right? So that's more than a lot of decks have, which is, pretty good. Moving on, we have ourselves a bunch of cards to keep an eye out for, specifically the Bestials. So the Bestials are particularly good due to the fact that they are, you can target a light or dark monster in either player's graveyard, banish it, and if you do, special summon this card. Now, all of them have that effect, except for this guy, who we'll talk about in a second, but all 4 of them have that effect. They're all insanely powerful and very good. Now, however, that isn't a quick effect, unless your opponent controls a monster, which makes it very good. Now, notably, all of the tier cards that actually fusion summon are, in fact, dark monsters. So, dope. The Bestials are very, very strong. That's it. But they're just good. However, they do all have secondary effects. Magnamut, on the, if it is special summoned, you can activate the effect during the end phase to add a dragon monster from your deck to your grave. Deck or grave to your hand. Sorry, misread. But yeah, you just get to add a dragon type monster, which is very good. And it's any dragon monster. It's not even another Bestial. So yeah, there's that. Or you could just add another Bestial during the end phase in order to have additional disruption during your opponent, or during your turn. Next up, we have Druid Swarm, has that same first clause. Then, if it is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target a special summon monster your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard. Now, this isn't as useful against Tier in particular, but it's still very nice to have, as it is nice to deal with things like the Dragastapelia or the Redoer or what have you. Next up, we have Baldrake. Now, this one is the most new, so again, not something I expect to see with the first round of Bestials, but who knows. Next, the Baldrake. You can target a light or dark monster in either graveyard, banish it, yada yada. Sorry, I'm just reading it again. If your opponent special summons a Ritual, Fusion, Xyz, Synchro, or Link monster, you contribute one other light or dark monster, then target those special summoned monsters and banish them. This is pretty cool. That's all. It's just pretty cool. Just get a banish them. You tribute another light or dark, which isn't that difficult, and deal with a special summoned monster, specifically like an extra deck monster, which is very nice. And it banishes, which is even better against Tear, but again, I doubt that will come up. Next up, we have Saronir, where if it's sent to the graveyard, you can send a Bestial monster or a branded spell trap from your deck to the graveyard. Yes, this is branded sport. It's fine. Trust. It's fine. Next up, we have the Bestial Lubellion, which cannot be a normal summoned or set, but must be special summoned from the hand or grave by tributing a level 6 or higher Dark Dragon monster, notably Albion. Albion? Yes, Albion is a Dark Dragon monster. So that's cool. You can only special summon a Bestial Lubellion once per turn this way. You can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to add a Bestial monster from your deck to your hand. Also, during your main phase, you can place a branded continuous spell trap from your deck face up on your field. Now, notably, that effect is just not applicable right now. I guess you could grab like Lost right now. I think that's the only card. But it will come up later. They get a spell and a trap that matter for the branded stuff, so that matters much more when probably the Bestials will actually release. I don't expect them to be released again at the same time as the tier stuff. However, yeah, all of these cards are very good. This one just grabs you another Bestial, and then obviously all of the Bestials are ways to deal with the tier stuff. I do expect that once the Bestials are released, this will be the way to play Dragon Link. In fact, even right now, this is the way to play Dragon Link. These cards are just really, really strong. That's it. There you go. As for other tech cards that you can throw in, obviously Dark Ruler No More is very good. Any sort of graveyard hate such as Dimension Shifter or Necro Valley is very nice. Big board wipes like Evenly Matched is also very good because they specifically banish face down. Evenly Matched is something that honestly you should probably be main decking during this format because it just deals with everything. But this is also where things like the Diviner play makes it a lot better because it does actually have the out to Evenly Matched. You can go Baron, negate the Evenly Matched, which is very nice there. Ghostbell and Haunted Mansion, Skullmeister are also very nice. If we don't get the Bestials, DD Crow is a great option, being able to go DD Crow and then banish one of your opponent's tier monsters that has activated their effect is very nice. I want to talk about, let's talk about Effect Feather. It's just Imperm 2.0. Yeah, very good card. Definitely should be playing it. But the problem with this is that it specifically activates only during the main phase, which means if your opponent has something, or like something happens during the standby phase, or you're like playing during the main or standby, or the draw or standby or end or battle or what have you, this isn't going to be nearly as useful. Next up, we have Nibiru. I want to talk about this card. Nibiru is honestly not all that good, right? Again, a lot of the tier stuff is specifically able to come back or gain effects by being sent to the graveyard. So, Nibiruing your opponent isn't going to do a whole lot. And oftentimes, yeah, it's not really that worth it. It may be worth it as like a side deck option, but again, we don't really have a side deck, so there's no real point in playing this card. Yeah, that's basically it. I don't even think it's necessarily going to be all that useful for like the other decks that would be playable. Besides like maybe Exosister would come up in that one, but like I don't expect it to be. No, it could also be very good against Splight, but again, other than those two, against tier it's not very good. It's just one of those things where it's like hedge your bets. Fenrir. Let's talk about Fenrir for a second. Kashtira Fenrir was a card that was released in Power of the Elements, along with all of the tier stuff. But this card is just Pank 2.0. If you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. And guess what? That means you can special summon it on your first turn. If your opponent doesn't have anything, you just get to summon it, which is very nice. It's just another monster. It's pretty cool. On top of that, you can special summon this and then normal summon an Ash and get Baron, which is also very cool. But once per turn, during your main phase, you can add a Kashtira monster from your deck to your hand. This includes Fenrir. So you could just add another Fenrir. So you go special summon Fenrir, add another Fenrir. Yeah, imagine if Pank could search out a second Pank. That's what this is, more or less. It's slightly weaker, though, but it does have a similar effect to be able to deal with multiple monsters through attacking. When this card declares an attack, or if an opponent's monster activates a monster effect, your opponent activates a monster effect, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, banish it face down. First of all, banishing something face down is the best way to deal with something, because that basically means that you're never getting it back. But more importantly, it is the ability to banish something face down. It's just overall very good, and it's similar to Pank being able to pop something. It's just like another way to walk into something, banish another thing, and then deal with the thing that you're attacking for one summon. So that's cool. Again, not a card that I necessarily think will be arriving with the tier stuff, but is definitely something to keep in mind because it was available with the tier stuff on first release in Power of the Elements. So there's that. Yeah, hopefully this gave you a basic understanding of what tier does and more or less how they function, and so how you can slow them down. Again, things like stopping the kit Kalos is very important, not specifically sending cards to the graveyard. That's just not a good idea, right? Being able to actually play on their turn as well as your own, so things like Flunder or the Ishizu tier themselves. The Shufflers are very nice. Graveyard Hate is also very nice. If you can play something like Dimension Shifter, it's going to be very impactful. So, you know, Exo Sister, Flunder, etc. Being able to play this card is very nice. I even saw people playing Splight with this card main decked in the Ishizu tier format, and the reason for that is just because it was that impactful, and Splight can relatively play around it without having too much worries. So, yeah, do keep that in mind. That's basically it. I mean, there's not a whole lot more to say about tier other than I doubt that we will receive it in such a high power way. I do expect something to be limited in some regard, whether that is like only Havness and a few of the other Ishizu cards, or whether that is like all of the cards being limited to 2, or what have you. But I do expect some limitations in some regard. Do I want that? No, I say that every time. But yeah, it just wouldn't make sense, at least in my eyes, to limit something prior to them actually even being released. I just think that's ridiculous. If they do need an emergency nerf or something like that, I think it'd be more than understanding. But, you know, there's that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. And if you did, a like is very much so appreciated. If you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh!, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.